Well, Hank, right now we're just told that Chief Craig just arrived on the scene. We are expecting to interview him live on the air, as right now we're standing in front of the headquarters. I do want to apologize for my squinting of my eyes. There were some tear gas released earlier. Some of that got into my eyes earlier, but a large crowd this afternoon, this evening. Let's take a look at some of the video of the protesters walking down 375. It's really a sight that you would have to be there to imagine. I've never saw anything like this before. It started off as a peaceful protest outside DPD, and then they made their way to 375, marching downtown. They marched down Michigan Avenue, Washington Boulevard, just very peaceful up to the moment of about 5 minutes ago outside here at DPD. The whole entire time, DPD were just standing there. They were allowing the protesters to have their message known, to say what they had to say, to march up and through downtown without any incidents whatsoever. It was just about 5 minutes ago where they had to release tear gas because there were fireworks and objects and bottles thrown at DPD right now. Here is Chief Craig walking up at this very moment right now. So if we can, we're going to take Chief Craig live on the television here right now.
How's everybody? Come on, give y'all, a little space.
Chief Craig, if you could just tell us exactly what happened out here today, anything.
Well, once again, our officers showed extreme patience. Again, started out as a simple protest, very peaceful, orderly. We supported that. At some point, they decided they wanted to go on a walking tour of the area. In fact, decided to take over a freeway. Fortunately, we had that section of the freeway shut down because we certainly didn't want to put anybody in harm's way. After that, they decided to leave the freeway, return, coming towards headquarters. They stopped near Hart Plaza. We could tell that they were getting somewhat agitated. We just knew. And so they decided to leave that location where they proceeded heading back here to headquarters. We did not want them to come too close to our building for obvious reasons. And that's when the protesters became violent. They began to throw projectiles from rocks, M80 grenades at officers. And so we learned that many of them came and was with ice chests, had a number of bricks. So it became a violent situation at that point. We're talking roughly 250, a much smaller group that we saw yesterday, but certainly at this point somewhat more agitated. So we did give the order to deploy gas and non-lethal munitions. Very effective. It did disperse the group. So right now we're getting feedback that it is dispersed, but not totally. But again, very patient. Officers were professional all night. We allowed them to go onto the freeway, but we knew that they were not in danger because we had restricted access by motor vehicle traffic. So with that, I'll take any questions you might have.
Craig, like as you mentioned, we've been out here all day since about 5 o'clock. Your officers were very patient the entire time. They allowed the crews to march. What was that initial factor that said, okay, enough is enough?
Well, again, if they were just going to stand there, we're patient. But when you start attacking the police officers, that's when enough is enough. Certainly when you're talking about projectiles from small-sized bricks, fireworks that certainly could have caused significant injury to an officer. And so we had no other choice. Certainly it was a safety issue for the officers. And again, very cooperative, tried to work. Even what was real disappointing is that many of our activists who had been on the ground tonight tried to engage some of the protesters. They could see the agitation and they said, look, I can't do anything with it, and decided to leave. So right now we've arrested 5. I don't have many more details than that, but we're hoping that the crowd is fully dispersed at this hour.
What about tomorrow night? Do many of them them saying they're going to return tomorrow night. Are you expecting the same?
You know what? We're going to treat it the same way we did tonight. We're going to be here in full force. We're going to continue to remain very professional. Again, we support the protests. We do not support law breakers. It's just not going to happen. One of our cars got damaged again tonight. Not as significant as last night. We had one window knocked out. But again, we're not going to tolerate law breaking. We support the issue. We want to continue to work with you and allow you the freedom to do so. But you're not going to impugn, you're not going to have an impact on public safety. It's not going to happen.
You mentioned earlier as far as the protesters not being from this area. Do we know if that was the case tonight? Were they from other areas?
Well, we didn't make, we made a substantial number of arrests last night. Not as many tonight. Again, we believe that tonight was going to be uneventful, but we were prepared in the event. But clearly we could see that the agitation of the group was starting to grow. And it was at that point we said, you know, and then they started propelling various objects at the officers. But what's concerning was the fireworks.
Chief Craig, any injuries that you know of, civilians or your officers?
I'm unaware. I think some of our officers were affected by the gas, but I'm not getting any reports of injuries tonight.
Chief, can you just catch us up for tonight? We just joined your press conference, and our viewers are watching you. We just saw things escalate right here outside headquarters.
Can you get your mask
break
up?
It down to us?
So, as I'd explained, the protesters clearly, we allowed them to go onto a restricted freeway, and it was during that time that we were patient. We allowed them to protest. We could see at one point the group was becoming more and more agitated. They ended up over at Hart Plaza. It was at that point I was monitoring that phase of it, and then I started getting reports that they were headed back to headquarters. Certainly concerned for the security of the building, and it was at that point when we stopped their access, they began to propel objects in the direction of the officers. I reported out to your colleagues, fireworks, M80s to be exact, bricks. But we've learned that many of these protesters came in with ice chests on wheels, and inside of them were bricks. So they came here clearly with the intention to be violent.
Chief Craig, are your officers trained to remain calm in such situations like this? Like I said, I've been out here all afternoon, and they were calm the entire time. Is that part of the training?
That is part of the training. I would tell you, the officers today are so professional. Starting, again, I always talk about how long I've been in the business, 44 years. I don't know if I would have had that level of patience, but I will tell you I'm very proud of the work that they did yesterday, the work they did tonight, and just we've been out here with them well over 5 hours.
How long do you anticipate to be out here tonight?
Well, as because of our last deployment of gas in response to the attack or the violent actions on the behalf of these protesters, they started to break up.
Can you talk about the manpower that was involved in not just last night, but tonight as well?
We had similar staffing tonight, very similar to what we had last night. I still maintain that we were sufficiently staffed to address what we had to deal with. Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
And so, guys, we just heard from Chief Craig, just wrapping up the events from tonight. And as you mentioned, there were several arrests made, but he did mention that we've been out here since 4 o'clock this afternoon, and his officers remained calm the entire time. Although they had on their gear, they did not push or try to agitate the protesters. They did that themselves. They started throwing rocks and water bottles and fireworks at the officers as well, and that's when they initiated the attempt to disperse the crowd. There were Chief Craig did mention several arrests made. He could not tell me if they were from this area or from outside of the area as well. But once again, overall started off as a peaceful protest. It's just the last 5 minutes or so where it got violent and they had to disperse the crowd. We're live outside DPD headquarters tonight. Larry Spruill, Local 4.
Yeah, and the chief also stressing no injuries, which we need to highlight as well. Thank you so much, Larry. We will check back in with you both, you and Hank, throughout our newscasts.